He sat across from me in my office, and he looked at me, his eyes full of pain, and he said, I just wanted to be Superman, and I failed. He was a Marine who had just come back from Afghanistan. He lost 4 of his friends in combat, and he blamed himself not only for that, but also for developing post-traumatic stress disorder. So I asked him, does Superman have any kind of a vulnerability, or is he fully invincible? And he said, well, Superman is vulnerable to kryptonite, of course. And if you're not familiar, kryptonite is this green substance from Superman's home planet to which he's basically allergic to. In small quantities, kryptonite weakens Superman's powers. In large quantities, it can actually kill him. So I asked him, does Superman being vulnerable to kryptonite make him any less of a superhero? Now, he was quick to jump to Superman's defense. He said, no, of course not. And then there was a pause, and then a light bulb, and then a smile. And then he said, I see what you did there. Because the truth is that every hero, real or fictional, has a vulnerability of their own. And it's not despite of that vulnerability that we care. It's because of it. We don't want to see some overpowered hero easily defeat all the villains and all the obstacles along the way. No, we want to see the kind of hero that shows up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because they believe in what they stand for. What we want to see is the kind of hero that's just like you, the kind of hero that faces challenges just like you. Because facing challenges is not a weakness. It is the core of our greatest strength. And just like your favorite hero, you too have faced numerous obstacles and have helped numerous people along the way. And you see, hardship is not a failure. It is your origin story. And every origin story begins with a struggle. My own origin story began in Ukraine, where I was born and raised. And when I was just a few months shy of my 3rd birthday, there was a massive explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and my family and I were exposed to large amounts of radiation. And to this day, I'm still waiting for my spidey senses, my Wolverine-like healing abilities, or Hulk-like super strength. But instead, my reality was spending most of my childhood in and out of the hospital, my immune system too weak to fight even a simple cold. And among the many side effects that I have suffered, to this day, I still experience severe migraines whenever the weather changes. And sometimes these lead to seizures. When I was 12 years old, my family and I immigrated to the United States. And sadly, like the many kids my age, I too was severely bullied. In my case, people would ask me if I'm radioactive, if I'm contagious, or my personal favorite, do you glow in the dark? Well, after a while, I started responding with, I'm working on it. But the truth is, most of that year, I just wanted to die. Really wanted to die. It wasn't just the bullying. It was because that year, more so than any other years of my life, I felt utterly and incredibly alone. I thought I was the only one going through excruciating depression. I thought I was the only one who was experiencing suffocating panic attacks, who was waking up in the middle of the night from another nightmare or crying myself to sleep. But then, a few years later, I saw a movie that changed my life forever. And that movie was The X-Men. The X-Men tells a story about mutants, each of which has some kind of a genetic mutation, allowing them to have certain powers and abilities. Most of them have been bullied and ostracized for being different. Most of them have felt depressed and alone. And me? I felt like I was watching myself on the screen. The character that immediately grabbed my attention was Storm. You see, until that point, I always felt like the weather controlled me. But seeing Storm being able to control the weather put me in awe. It was the first time that I was able to realize that what happened to me doesn't define me. I was able to realize that instead of being a victim of my origin story, I was the survivor of it. And looking around the completely sold out movie theater, with every moviegoer being fully engrossed in the film, their eyes full of tears, just like mine were, I realized I was not alone. I realized that many of us go through tremendous struggles, but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about our trauma, our loneliness, perhaps because we were shamed for doing so, or maybe because we don't know how. And so I realized that maybe we can use fictional characters to better understand our own stories, to build a vocabulary of our own experiences, and to find our very own hero's journey. And if stories were so helpful for me, I thought, maybe I can use stories to help other people understand their trauma too. And so it was right after seeing that movie that I signed up for my first ever psychology class in high school and never looked back. What I was experiencing is something called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is a kind of positive change that happens to some people after they go through something traumatic. It means making meaning from our trauma and using it to help other people who are just at the beginning of their own hero's journey. Being able to give something back, helping other people, is in fact the biggest predictor of symptom reduction and trauma recovery. Now, we know that trauma is not necessary for us to find our heroic voices, and we know that sometimes for some people, trauma can serve to unlock the superpowers that were there in the first place. I look at post-traumatic growth as kind of like a hero's journey. We don't always choose the call that we get, but sometimes we can choose how we might be able to answer it. Unfortunately, some of us might be met with shame and criticism, being called too sensitive, being told to just get over it, right as we're in the middle of our greatest heartbreak. And after a while, other people's critiques start to become our own. So we might begin to shame ourselves at the very moment that we have the greatest need for compassion and empathy. Now, I view emotional challenges as dragons. You see, some people just get up and go to work, and other people have to fight 5, maybe 6 dragons just to get out of bed. And so if you're fighting off one dragon, or maybe a clan of dragons with one hand, and maybe typing your report with another, well, then it makes sense that it might take you longer to complete your work, and that your report might not be as pristine as it otherwise would have been had you not been fighting all those dragons. But the very fact that you were able to do work, any work, the fact that you were able to get out of bed while facing all those dragons, that is already impressive. Fantasy author Neil Gaiman says fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. Now, sometimes we might be facing so many monsters that we might have a hard time getting out of bed in the first place. And that's exactly why I want to tell you about the cortisol cycle. Cortisol is a stress hormone which is released when we're going through high levels of distress. It's involved in fight or flight response and also inflammation management. Now, here's a picture of the cortisol cycle. What do you see? The amount of cortisol in our body is highest in the morning, around the time that you have to get out of bed. And because cortisol is a stress hormone, it literally means that getting out of bed is the most stressful thing you're going to do all day. So if you've already done it, congratulations, you've already done the most stressful thing you're going to do today. And if you haven't, if you need a little bit of extra time for yourself, a few more minutes, a few more hours, maybe a few more days, to complete a given task or to take care of yourself, you're not being weak or lazy. You're being wise. You're facing your inner dragons and you're allowing your body to strengthen so that when it's time, you can get back into that battlefield to fight not only your own dragons, but to help other people to fight theirs. Now, every hero needs a wise and compassionate mentor. And if you have such a person in your life, like a friend, a family member, or a teacher, a therapist, that's great. But for some of us, such mentors might not be so readily available. And so we might be left to feel alone and forgotten, right as we're facing some of the biggest challenges of our lives. Now, some recent research studies are actually finding that fictional characters can sometimes function as a surrogate friend, family member, or support group. And so I'd like to invite you to imagine for a moment that you have the ability to meet any hero of your choice. This could be a real life hero like a grandparent or a teacher, even if they're no longer alive, or maybe a historical figure, a celebrity, even if you've never met them, or perhaps a fictional character. It is someone who is a figure of compassion and wisdom for you. And see if you can imagine that you have a few moments alone with your hero. Your hero already knows your origin story. They know what you've been through, what you're feeling, what you aspire to. You don't even have to explain anything. Your hero already fully understands. Your hero sees you and hears you. And your hero has the kindest, most encouraging and compassionate message for you. What might your hero say to you? Perhaps your hero might remind you that you've already overcome so many obstacles, how resilient you are, and how you've already helped countless of other people. Not too long ago, I was working with a teenage client. Let's call her Kelly, but that's not her real name. Kelly had been severely bullied in elementary school, and by the time she got to high school, she could barely leave the house because of her anxiety. She felt so much shame about not being able to leave her home that she often said that she just wanted to die. Kelly didn't realize how many dragons she was facing on a daily basis and how many she had faced the day that she first made it into my office. During her first few sessions, Kelly barely talked. She mostly responded with 1 or 2 word answers. And then we started talking about her origin story. We talked about her experiencing bullying, and we started talking about her hero. This part was easy. Kelly said that her biggest hero was this TV show character, Dean Winchester, from the TV show Supernatural. In case you're not familiar with Supernatural, it's a TV show about 2 brothers, Sam and Dean Winchester, whose mother was murdered by an evil demon when they were small children. Sam and Dean then spend the rest of their lives fighting different kinds of supernatural monsters, saving people as well as each other. Dean is often not able to process his own trauma, his own emotions, because of all of his responsibilities, taking care of his younger brother as well as the other people. Kelly said that she really related to Dean, in that she too had often put her needs away to support other people. So I asked Kelly to imagine that she had a few moments alone with Dean, who had wise, encouraging words for her. She burst into tears as she was thinking about Dean's message. She wrote it down, and she wrote that Dean would remind her of her courage, that he would remind her that she was already a real-life monster hunter, and that he would tell her that she is the bravest person that he knew. So I asked Kelly what being a monster hunter would mean to her, and she said it would mean facing her anxiety, going back to school, and being a supportive friend to others. So given that, we spent 2 months fighting her inner monsters, getting ready, and then she did it. We talked on the phone that morning. She was crying and shaking. She felt nauseated. She actually got sick on the way to school. There were several times when she wanted to turn back, but Dean's voice rang in her mind. "You are a monster hunter, Kelly." And so with that, she got out of the car. She was still crying. She still felt pretty sick, but she was able to stay for 1 full period. The following day, she was able to stay for 2. And by the end of the week, she was able to stay for the full day of school. And over time, Kelly realized that she wasn't alone in facing some of these monsters. She realized that there were other students in her school that were also facing anxiety, depression, and other challenges. So one day in our session, I asked, what would Dean do? And she thought about it. And she said, Dean would not only face his monsters, he would help other people to face theirs. And so Kelly is currently working with her school's guidance counselor to create a virtual mental health club in her school, to have students meet and talk about some of the monsters that they're facing in real life. And in doing so, Kelly became the very kind of monster hunter that she had always wanted to be. And I wanted to leave you with this today. If you're struggling, remember that this right now, this is your origin story, your hero's journey. And if you're scared, this is you being brave. It's okay to take time during it. It's okay to take your time, especially when you're facing numerous dragons along the way. And remember that just like your own mentor, you too serve as a mentor and a role model to other people. You might not even know the impact that you've made in other people's lives. There might even be a person who's alive today because of something kind that you did or said, and they might never even think to tell you this. But remember that you have a purpose. You have a gift to give to this world, and your work isn't done yet. This is your story. You matter. You make a difference. So please, keep superheroing, and don't forget your cape. Thank you.